In this video, we will hear Louise Hay give her insights and enlighten us. Louise Hay explains a definition of health that helps us choose to assist in our own healing, basically preparing us to be our own healers. It is a joy to understand Louise Hay, to stretch our minds and understand the totality of possibilities available to us. The totality of possibilities is actually the perception of being limitless. Limitless thinking of our human mind, of our human capacities, and our individual upbringings. Those of us who have been studying the art of manifestation know that we are all a part of an infinite intelligence, an intelligence that is everywhere and is limitless in its possibilities. It is equally present and knows everything that we can conceive of, and even some things we cannot perceive as of yet. Even though man has conquered both space and time and its many capacities, our human minds are still always thinking of limitations. It's always saying that it can't be done, that this way or that way. Well, why not ask? We know that God is unlimited, so why are we subscribing to the belief system which is ingrained within us that there are limitations and there could never be enough? Everyone feels like they're not good enough for whatever they truly deeply want. When you believe that you can think and you can communicate, that you are limitless in your capacity for personal growth and fulfillment, you will realize that you are as good as anyone else, perhaps even better in fact than anyone else, at doing what it is that you truly want to do. One day, whenever you are willing to discover and change your thinking by dropping your limitations and pursuing your true purpose in life, you will realize that you will bypass all the limitations that stand in your way. You will conquer every obstacle and every struggle. You will cease to fear what your neighbors think or what your family approves of. Instead, you will entertain life-changing possibilities for prospering. You will truly value the gift that is your ability to think for yourself, out of trouble and limitations. We have the capacity to understand and express ourselves through our lives. We will always be able to direct our thoughts wherever we can. We see people around us do something uncommon every day. If you are keen to know how to manifest your best self into your physical reality, subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and now let's hear Louise Hay in her own words.
The totality of possibilities. Think about that for a moment. What does that conjure up for you? What do you feel when you hear that? I learned that phrase when I lived in New York City many years ago from one of my early teachers, Eric Pace. He used to talk about the totality of possibilities, and I see it as no limitations at all. Where I am and where you are is the totality of possibilities, far beyond the limited thinking of our human mind. Our human mind is very small, and it's very limited, and it's what we dwell in now, but it isn't all that we are. Those of us who have been studying for some time, we know we are part of infinite intelligence. Infinite intelligence that is everywhere equally present and knows everything, past, present, and future. And there are possibilities that we can't conceive of with our limited human thinking, but they're there. I mean, after all, spaceships were here when Cleopatra was around. They just didn't know how to get it together. And there's stuff out there right now that we don't know how to get together, but it doesn't mean it's not possible. The totality of possibilities is exactly where we are. And yet most of us sit in our little human minds, and our human mind is always thinking of limitations. Always. It's saying it can't be done that way. Well, why not? There's not enough. We hear that so much. And yet we know that God is unlimited. So how can there be not enough? Nobody's ever done it that way. Well, so what? Now it's time for somebody to do it. I'm not strong enough, young enough, tall enough, good enough. I'm not the right sex. How often have we heard, men can't do that, women can't do that? And yet we know that that's nonsense, because for everything we've said a woman can't do, some woman is doing it. And for everything we've heard that a man can't do, there is some man doing it. I don't have the right education. How many times have we bought into that as our limitation? I bought into that for years because I was a high school dropout. And I believed I couldn't think, and I didn't have any mind, and I didn't know anything, and that I wasn't as good as people who'd gone to school. And then one day I discovered that that wasn't true. And when I dropped my limitation, I found that I had an incredible mind, and I could think, and that I could communicate. But I was the one that was limiting me, not anybody else. I remember when I first discovered the Church of Religious Science, and they said to me, if you change your thinking, you can change your life. And I believed it. And then the thing was to find out how to do that. The more I was willing to change my thinking, which is really dropping our limitations, the easier it was to move into the totality of possibilities, which is already here. How about the limitation, I don't have enough money? God knows we've done that one enough. And yet, you know, too often we say, I can't do such and such because I don't have the money. And we limit ourselves at the financial level when what we really want is to do something else. And we do all this struggle for the money which we don't believe we deserve, and we never get to do what we really want. Whereas if we would bypass that limitation and say, I know that where I am is the totality of possibilities and I can experience this, then we could go right toward it. Then the other one that's so wonderful and I really love is, what will the neighbors think? What will the neighbors think? Well, they may not approve. And so what? So what? Who's living your life? Are you living your life for your neighbors? If you go beyond what your neighbors think, you may pick them up, because when they see what you're doing in your life, they may come to you. Instead of condemning you, they may say, what are you doing? I want to know. Because I see what you're doing. I see how your life is changing. I see where you're prospering. I see where you're healing yourself. Come and tell me what you're doing. When we help ourselves, we can help our neighbors. Where God is, all things are possible. And we know that God is everywhere, beyond the universe. Our minds get so limited. We think sometimes that our neighborhood is everything, or our city is everything, or our state, or our country. And some of us can expand to the whole planet. But then we forget that planet Earth is a tiny little pinpoint in a far-off corner of a minor galaxy. And there are 100 billion galaxies in the universe that we know of. And where God is, all things are possible. And God is everywhere. So how can we limit ourselves to our bodies, or our neighborhood, or anything else? When we stand and say, I can't, or my parents didn't do it, or what would the neighbors think, then we're stuck. When we see something happen, do we immediately go to our preconceived ideas? If you see somebody that is sick, do you immediately start with, oh, poor thing, how you must be suffering? Or do you look at them and see the absolute truth of their being and know that the health of God is within them and can express through them? And this is the true experience for them. Do you give them the totality of possibilities? See, when we see someone suffering, We don't want to bring ourselves down to that level, because if we do, we cannot really help them. I spend my life seeing the truth in people, and it's amazing the number of people that get it and work with it. What we do with our minds is incredibly important. In fact, that's the whole thing that we're talking about, what we do with our minds. Our minds are creative. We can create anything with our minds. We can change all circumstances. We can go in any direction. We can walk on coals when we didn't know we could. I mean, everybody knows it's impossible to walk on hot coals, and yet there are people that are doing it. How many people have heard about walking on hot coals? All right, how many people here have done it? Not many, but some. There are some people here that have done it, and we know it's impossible, and yet there are people on this planet today doing it, starting with Tony Robbins, who is teaching people how to do it in one evening. Our minds are capable of so much more than we think. So we know that our thoughts are creative, and this is one of the most important laws of nature that we can possibly know. Remember, one idle thought does not mean very much, but thoughts that we think over and over are like drops of water, and at first there's just a few, but after a while you create a puddle, and then a pond, and then a lake, and then an ocean. And by our thinking, if it is negative, we can drown in a sea of negativity. Or if it is positive, we can float on the ocean of life. And it all has to do with how we use our thoughts to think. Now, do you live in the limitations of your past consciousness? Many, many, many people come to a point in life where they say, that's it. In fact, lots of us don't realize, but many of us put limitations on what life is and who we are and where we can go by the time we are 5 years old. We make our mental decisions by 5. Basically, we make our limitations and we say, this is it, and we don't let new stuff in. And if you're living by your past limitations, how can you possibly go into the totality of possibilities? How often do you live at the limitations of your parents' consciousness? My mommy, my daddy couldn't do this. They didn't go beyond this. This is what they said. You want to realize that whether they were the worst parents in the world or they were the best parents in the world, they had their own set of limitations, and you don't want to limit yourself by that. An affirmation that I've given many, many people to use is, I am willing to go beyond my parents' limitations. You can love them, and you don't have to live where their limitations are. We create our own reality. We do this by the thoughts we think and the words we speak. And when we can really understand that, we have the ability to make changes. So is our reality one of limitations and lack and I can'ts? Or is our reality one of the totality of possibilities? How much do we allow ourselves to stretch? When you have a problem, do you immediately set up the walls of your limitations, your mental limitations, or do you go through them? Are you using the tools you have learned? Or when there is a problem, do you immediately jump back to the old reactions? And where are your limits? Where do you see your limits? Remember, all fears are limitations, all fears. We put those up and it's like we have this wall around us that we can't go through. And not only can we not go through, but nothing can get in. Nothing can get in. All prejudices are limitations, all of them. We limit ourselves by saying somebody's not good enough. How can that be true when all souls are equal? The soul has no color, and the soul has no sexuality at all. So we want to go beyond that kind of limitation. All judgments and criticisms are limitations. When we judge another person, when we criticize another person, we are putting a wall up, and no way can good come to us. When we judge ourselves, when we criticize ourselves, it's like we've slammed a steel door down. And how can good come into our life? How can the totality of possibilities really operate when we're putting up our walls and our limitations? All guilts are limitations, all guilts. And we can't do that. There is no point in getting into guilt. If you've really done something in your life that's terrible, don't do it again. Just don't do it anymore. Guilt is a way of holding on to the past. And when you live in the past, you are not in the totality of possibilities. The present moment gives you the opportunity to move into the future. You can't live in the future either. You can only live here because this is where everything is happening, right here. See, when you are unwilling to forgive, you place limits on your growth. And yes, there are many of us that have things that are extraordinarily difficult to forgive. And yet it is part of our evolution and our growth. I've said this many times and I really believe it. I think we come to this planet many times to learn whatever lessons we need to learn. And for some of us, it's like coming to kindergarten. It's real simple and we just skip through life and it's easy.